yeah, people were hearing things, people were getting freaked out. Some gentleman in Delhi had started a helpline called a paranormal helpline to talk people through, if you're seeing something, call me, I will tell you what's going on.
Like a very interesting story that we came to know through these conversation was the fact that the Bangalore airport is
Oh,
haunted. One of the runways of the Bangalore airport is haunted, and there are news stories about it. That a pilot, in the middle of the night, saw a woman in a sari just walking around, on the runway, and then like people from the airport actually went to check if there was,
mm,
because that's a big security breach,
yeah.
right? So there are very many stories like this across the length and breadth of this country.
We have like multiple kinds of data points captured within the data set. And of course, with like ghost tours or like sort of places where money is exchanging hands, we want to capture the economic data. We want to know how much money people are spending on these activities, what portion of their, monthly salary is going into something like this. Is this something
Mm,
that's a regular expense for them? Because,
mm,
for some families, across communities, it's a regular expense to kind of have someone come in and like do some kind of cleanse in their house.
mm.
And what kind of socioeconomic background are these families coming from? Are these families that can afford to do it, or is this like portion of money that is going away from something else that is going into this?
Hi, Diwakar and Azania. I saw this India Ghost Project board on the LinkedIn and it was so intriguing. Can you tell us a little bit, like what is this project? How did it start? Just
Sure. So thank you so much, Priyanka, for reaching out to us. Diwakar and I actually met many years ago, and I, at that point, was working on my master's thesis, which was on how a lot of ghost stories had come out of the COVID-19 crisis. And we got talking about it. And then sometime last year, we were like, no, wait, let's institutionalize it. Let's make it a proper research project. And that is how it started. I think it'd be great if Diwakar could tell you a bit more about what the project is.
Yeah, actually, the interesting part is that Azania and I met at the airport coming back from the UK. We both were graduate students there. She was doing her master's. I just started my PhD, and we got stuck at the airport because there was a new variant of COVID-19 that had come up in the UK, and the Indian government and Maharashtra government basically wanted us to quarantine, do an institutional quarantine in a hotel for 2 weeks before we could meet our family. And there we started, like almost in a haunted hotel, started talking about Azania's very interesting research on sort of ghost stories coming out of COVID-19. And immediately I was very intrigued and wanted to sort of do something around it. I'm an economist. Azania is more of an anthropologist, sociologist by training. And we wanted to do something about it back from 2020, but only time and work and resources only allowed us to start now after very many years of conversation. What we are essentially trying to do is get um, the stories around ghosts and paranormal activities all together in one place, to then be able to understand how these things are affecting people differently, how it is impacting both the society and the economy, and uh, how different facets of it engage with the structures and even infrastructure of a particular space, how it affects a city, how it affects a state, how it affects the people. So we are trying to put together a space where we can collect all of these stories and activities and then be able to analyze them.
can I just backtrack a little? Can you tell a little on this COVID-19 ghost stories? Because I don't know this at all. And I am very surprised.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. So when the pandemic happened, I had just started my master's at Oxford, and I was supposed to be working on a project about the coastal development in Mumbai. So I do anthropology. I also have a very strong background in public policy, and that was my interest. But all of my research got like stopped because obviously, there was no field work involved. There was no way to kind of, be in back and forth between India and the UK. Like flights were few and far and flights were expensive. So I needed to do something that I could potentially do digitally. And at that point, I started seeing a lot of news reports. And this is like, Times of India, The Hindu, Mumbai Mirror, which were all kind of doing these little bits on how people were seeing ghosts in their
Oh,
house. People were
really?
like here. Yeah, people were hearing things, people were getting freaked out. Some gentleman in Delhi had started a helpline called a paranormal helpline to talk people through, if you're seeing something, call me, I will tell you what's going on. And that was really fascinating to me. And I had done a bit of work around like spaces and how people find them haunted and scary, especially, when they're under redevelopment or construction. So this was something this was space I was familiar with. But the whole pandemic, COVID, lockdown situation just gave it a very different color. So I was like, wait, let me see what's going on here.
Mm.
I ended up speaking to a lot of people, including people who said they'd seen ghosts during COVID, and a lot of people who were, helping these people out, like these paranormal investigators. And the fundamental conclusion that came to was because the cities had been so deeply empty. And it's something we're not used to. We're not
Yeah.
used to, say, a Mumbai, and that's where my project was based, being quiet, that people were hearing sounds they'd never heard before. They didn't know what their pipes sounded like. They didn't know what that weird bird sound coming in the morning was. And it was also just the isolatedness of everything that was kind of taking a very significant mental toll on people. And this sort of then became kind of intertwined with the idea of, okay, the city is empty, but who has left the city? And as you'll know, during the COVID lockdowns, it wasn't the middle class and the upper middle class people owning apartments in cities who left. It was the migrant laborers. It was,
Mm.
your cooks, your cleaners, your drivers, your watchmen. And this is a significant chunk of the population that, your records don't even see as like residents or citizens. Or citizens is a bad word in context of cities, but people who are like part of the city, they're seen as, migrant workers.
Mm.
And how their absence had made the city completely foreign to the people who were supposed to be from it. And now they were seeing ghosts. And at the same time, all these news reports were calling these, the ghost workers or the ghost laborers. And like this whole concept of like, okay, we don't even recognize labor as fully human kind of came into being. So it was a very fascinating time from a research perspective to
Mm.
be working on this. But yeah.
Wow, I totally missed this. I guess one is I don't get these newspapers and all, but social media I thought should have brought this to me. It never did. Great. So you guys connected over that and set up this whole project. But still, how? So how did this whole project happen? Like, is there something that happens in other countries that you all figured we should do it, or you all just thought it needs a repository or something?
So, obviously, Azania has been reading and thinking and talking to many, many people around it. But since we started discussing this, I took more interest in trying to see what kind of paranormal activity discussion in academia is taking place in other places. And to my surprise, it is a very rampant thing that is being conversed about across board. There are very many academics involved in very many places which are thinking and talking and engaging in
Mm.
these ideas. In the UK, for example, there is an app that you can download in your phone, and that will tell you how far away you are from a haunted space or a haunted house.
That's really
And
key.
yeah, and no matter where you are in the UK, an estimation is that you are never more than 15 minutes drive away from unhaunted space.
Wow.
So there is this kind of work being done in very many places. So um, we wouldn't like to claim this is the first time it is
Mm.
ever happening anywhere. But from our estimation and understanding, and the fact that we have been working on the field, I think this is the first time it is taking place in India,
Mm.
where we are trying to put together a space where all of these kinds of ideas are being brought under one roof. People have researched on paranormal activities and ghosts and written about it in India as well. But
Mm.
I don't think that has been brought under one roof or a concerted effort to bring it under one space. And that's what Azania and I are trying to do.
And also, I don't know whether research type of a thing may have happened. I guess it might have happened actually, because the scientific community will always someone will be interested in this topic.
Hmm.
I
Sure.
you
Sorry, I
want.
mean, no,
Mm.
I was just gonna say that, I mean, concern for the longest has not been to prove or disprove, right? We're
Mm.
not interested, I mean, beyond like maybe personal curiosities into whether these things are real.
Mm.
We're a lot more interested in what does this do to the people and to the communities and to the spaces where these stories or these incidents are discussed around. I mean, there is a significant amount of research that has happened on the social sciences side of things as well. And again, as you said, there are people who have tried to set out to prove and disprove. I think there was this whole early 2000s wave of like TV shows as well that
Mm.
used to come that were like we'll go to a haunted location and we will stay the night there or we will record stuff. So it's not like there is a lack of media around it or there is a lack of documentation. It's just that there is never, at least in India, been a very formalized way of putting it together. So that is kind of our attempt here.
But didn't you all? So one of the reasons a large number of like common people may not want to get into this kind of a topic because you get scared, like even for the few number of cases which is real, and you don't really want to get involved over there because you don't know how those forces may respond, react. So how do you feel about this? And clearly, you all are not that freaked because you would not have started otherwise. But what is your outlook?
I guess we have a good faith approach to this. We want to um, document what people believe and how it is impacting them. Um, we we would want to bring all of the information that we can to a place where we are able to apply our analytical skills and encourage other researchers to apply theirs and engage with the issue. We aren't necessarily focused on any one specific thing that is taking place. Unfortunately, I guess the researchers and the workers who are involved in the project with us are a little brave. So this hasn't come up yet. We all get spooked, right?
Yeah.
That like we all have a moment of feeling eerie of like,
Yeah.
what is that? But I guess there is sort of a genuine curiosity that drives us to understand human behavior, to understand things that motivate us, that make us scared, things that drive us, and how we engage with all of these different ideas.
So, do you all actually have you all specifically visited sites and all, or you all try to collect the information little remotely?
So we haven't started physical field work just yet. We're waiting on our ethical clearances to come through. We have our survey tools in place, and our team is very excited to get started. But that hasn't happened yet. I mean, as part of my previous projects, I have been to apparently or allegedly haunted spaces before, but not as part of India Ghost Project so far.
Right now what we are trying to do is essentially collect stories. So we have a lot of people send in the stories that they have been engaging with, or things that are happening around them, or what people have come to know or believe, or things such as those. But uh, because we are academics,
Mm.
one of our biases is that even with regards to, say, paranormal activity story, we only want to engage with it, publicly once we have done our research, once we have gone and spoken with enough people and they have told us. So one of the things that we want to do is, if say you come to us and you say that this is a paranormal activity or a story or this place is haunted, we then want to go around and talk to other people in the locality
Mm.
and engage with their idea of what they think has happened. And when enough and more people say things which are kind of more or less aligned with what you tell us, then we want to put it out as, say, a ghost story or a
Mm.
paranormal story linked to a particular space, because it gives us kind of rigor. That doesn't mean that we want to take away from what you believe
Mm.
you saw or what happened to you. We just are trying to put a more sort of academically rigorous thing of, how we believe we can verify a sort of a narrative. That's how we are approaching this project. But to be honest, there are some quite spooky things that we have come around. I mean, I don't want to like open the Pandora's box, but some like a very interesting story that we came to know through these conversation was the fact that the Bangalore airport is
Oh.
haunted. One of the runways of the Bangalore airport is haunted, and there are news stories about it. That a pilot, in the middle of the night, saw a woman in a sari just walking around, on the runway, and then like people from the airport actually went to check if there was,
Mm.
because that's a big security breach,
Yeah.
right? So there are very many stories like this across the length and breadth of this country. We want, and these are popular stories reported in the newspaper. So we
Mm.
want to bring all of those stories onto our forum. But at the same time, we also want to have the stories from our villages, from small towns,
Mm.
cities, things that affect the neighborhood, ghost stores, all kinds of things linked to the paranormal, brought on this forum in a somewhat academic way.
I think one of the very interesting things that happens in rural India is there are these places where you have little shrines and they have these names, and if you ask them the story, they will say somebody died here, so we made this. It's actually a shrine, then a little temple sort of a thing, and I find that whole phenomenon quite fascinating because generally, if someone dies, you won't like you're almost defying those people, not deifying, like you're making them into deities, like protective forces of some kind. So, have you all come across this also?
We've definitely seen a lot of these sort of stories come across as well. And I think there's also just stories where, you've got particular entities doing particular things, like you said, where they get deified. Like, say someone on a highway dies in a motorcycle accident,
Mm.
little shrine is made to them. And now that motorcyclist is like saving other people from getting into accidents. So there is that sort of, it's like not all ghost stories are
Yeah.
scary stories. There is this element of, sometimes what's beyond comes and sort of tries to protect you, tries to save you. So that is very fascinating. I think also just like stories like, the airport story are
Mm.
particularly fascinating to me because this is not a space you expect to be haunted,
Yeah.
right? Our airport, which is active 24
Mm.
hours, has like so much staff, so many people coming. It's so modern, right? It's
Mm.
like completely an invention of the modern times, an airport.
Mm.
It's just there's something so fascinating and fun about it. Like, of course, there's a ghost on the train. That makes perfect sense. But what's a ghost doing on a flight? I think that kind of energy of how our stories are changing as well
Mm.
is just something that I think a lot more attention should be paid to, because it will also tell us a lot about how we as a people are changing and what are we
Mm.
responding to, what are we fearing, what are our anxieties, what are like the things we want to be protected from. So it's a very good resource into like the everyday human psyche.
Yeah, the airport one is fascinating because, as you're saying, it's a security breach. So it's not like, and if it would have happened like one off, they would never have reported in the media because that is also a problem, right? Somebody thinking the airport is haunted, that's totally bizarre. Like, you wouldn't want that kind of story out. So the fact that it's even come out and it might have happened a few times probably for, so it's pretty. Crazy.
Yeah, but I also want to point out that some of the things that we have come across, sometimes sometimes there are some forces that do want these kind of information out, especially in construction projects, on
Mm.
disputed properties, on
Oh.
lands that are sort of engaged in some kind of ownership battle.
Mm.
It is not uncommon that
Right.
that one of these places suddenly become haunted and it's in
Ah.
the newspaper, and then there is hoo-ha around it.
Ah.
So there are many ways in which I mean in which the people involved in spaces sometimes use and abuse
Mm.
the notion of paranormal. So it's quite an interesting space. Obviously, this doesn't link to the airport because we can't think of why anyone would be interested
Yeah.
in, like, you know
Mm-hmm.
dramatizing a working runway. But then there are other places with
Mm.
other disputes, other kind of development ideas that are impacted by the notion of ghosts, or the paranormal. For instance, fairly recently, actually, somewhere in Rajasthan, there were these stories that were coming up where women in certain rural communities very many of them are claiming that they are being possessed,
Mm.
and there is suddenly a mark of Trishul, which is sort of almost carved out on their hands,
Mm.
uh, and uh, and and this is sort of captured the imagination of the locality. But one of the offshoots of this has been that domestic abuse in the locality has gone down,
Whoa.
because, because now men are scared of hitting their wives because there is a greater power residing in their wives. Now, again, we don't want to take any value judgment of
Mm.
what is happening, but certain academics are taking an interesting stand on one of the reasons why this could be happening could be the fact that there is a significant amount of domestic abuse that takes place in certain parts, right? So, and it would definitely make sense for someone in the media to sort of popularize it, to, if nothing, put the fear of, if not God, the paranormal at least, in the minds of the men who
Mm.
are, practicing domestic abuse. So there are a lot of socioeconomic forces at play connected to the paranormal, and our prime interest is in understanding what is going on there without any value judgment
Mm.
or on the belief side.
No, it's very fascinating because talking about Rajasthan itself, they also have a culture of, those possessed rituals. We have those rituals in temples, right, where there is this one person who is that person who gets possessed. And I knew of them that happened in Kerala and stuff. It's pretty famous now with especially the Kantara movie. But recently I was reading about Rajasthan also. They have that culture. They are called something called the Bopas or something. So these Bopas are the people who actually are very often be part of this thing where they will get possessed and the deity will come and speak certain things, do certain things. And some of those deities are supposed to be very violent. So those particular Bopas themselves will get violent, but they themselves are under the risk of self-harm because you're getting violent and you might actually end up hurting yourself. And apparently there was a case where one of those guys even died in one of these practices because he just that whatever possessing force was just too violent. And so, because of this, if this happens in women, as you are saying, there is already the cultural setup for that to be accepted. Because I think a lot of these women, the temple possession rituals do happen with women as well. Because the woman will be in the temple and she'll be the one possessed and be telling a lot of things. So it's. I think it's interesting that the whole cultural fabric does allow for it. But I understand what you're saying. I was reading up on this Kerala thing more, the possession ritual, and apparently there are some rituals where women play a larger role. And one of the research papers I was reading did mention that it may be a way for them to have a psychological output, just they need to just remove a lot of things. And so this is kind of a venue for them to just burst out and without social judgment and all that stuff. So it's a very mixed. Yeah, it's very difficult not to really make out what's what, as you're saying, because we don't want to judge it or we don't want to know whether this is true or not. I guess in a way it is making things easier for us because we may just not know.
Yeah, I
I mean,
think.
sorry, go on, Azania,
No, no.
please.
I was just saying that I think the sitting with the not knowing is a very important part of being in these spaces. That if you went out with the assumption that at the end of this project we are going to have answers, we would be setting ourselves up for failure. I think it is just being quite aware that we don't know what we don't even know. And that becomes our starting point with this kind of work. And I think, please add, Diwakar.
No, exactly. So I think where Azania and I are very much aligned is that um, we have a very clear picture of what we want to know, which is basically how this is affecting the society and people and spaces. Um, Obviously we are curious creatures and we would want to know if there are ghosts and how they are engaging with us, but I think we, as much as our curiosity pushes us in that direction, there are things that you can know, you can find out, you can study, and there are things that uh, you know generations and generations of people have tried to sort of answer, and there is still ambiguity around it. So I think we have some kind of clarity on what we want to focus our energy on, and just take out any judgment from it and be able to comment on things that are happening and people and their lives, and we can in any way, shape, or form improve that. That would be great, and that's where we are trying to focus our energy on.
Yeah, it's wonderful. I see a lot of use cases. One of the things, especially because I travel a lot, the, there is always a small thing that I wonder, someday I may book some place. What if it's haunted or something? How will I know? Like, nowadays you can fake reviews and do so many things. So, but so that's one way, obviously, even if we are going for real estate or we are going to purchase something, these kind of things will be so helpful. And other than that, I can definitely see like somebody who's facing something like this, they could come to your website and actually maybe find some parallels and say, okay, some other incident is happening. Maybe there can be some learnings or something like that. Are there other use cases you all are seeing for your website?
Sure, I think for us, of course serves as a massive data set, and that is the primary goal of it. I mean, of course, we want it to be open source. We want people to, use it however they wish. I mean, and even if that's just to kind of do like a sort of joyride around like haunted spots in Mumbai or Delhi, Bangalore, wherever, go for it. No judgment from our end. I think, but for us, it's more key that researchers, policymakers, people in positions of certain power are able to have access to this data and see how decisions are being made based on this data. I mean, for example, like you said, oh, you'd want to know a hotel you're staying on is not haunted. That's very important information even for a hotelier. And as far as the real estate is concerned, it's very important information even for, like, say, governments taking up, like, redevelopment projects. Because what if, and I've seen this happen, you build up like two massive stories of apartment complexes, you're planning on like rehousing people there, and people just refuse to step in. And that's a crisis of public policy as well, right? It's
Yeah.
not just this sense of what do you call it, bad design. I mean, I wouldn't even call it bad design. And it's important because you can't just go on and tell someone that, listen, ghosts are not real, be intelligent, be smart, you're an educated person, go stay there. I mean, as educated and as smart as I am, if someone told me this hotel, by the way, definitely haunted, but we're booking you in, I wouldn't stay, right? I think it's just that sort of like, even as incredibly rational modern creatures, we make certain decisions based on our internal anxieties. So that is like a key information set. I think for us, it's also important to capture the economic exchanges that are happening when it comes to this sort of like paranormal transactions almost. I think, Divakar, if you can just elaborate a little bit more on that.
Yeah, so one of the things that we would like to make sure is that there is no or little abuse that is taking place in the name of the paranormal. And often we see that there is financial exploitation taking place of people by, um, people who claim to be godmen or tantrics or exorcists, and they extort a lot of money from people in sort of difficult positions in situations of abuse. So we want to document that. We want to document what kind of economic impact do these things have on people's lives, and then we are hoping that people in positions of power will see that,
Mm.
and in case there is any sort of area of abuse, will bring an end to that. So we want this data set to be used by policymakers, researchers, economists, sociologists to identify places where any kind of abuse is taking place, and then kind of bring an end to that if they can. Simultaneously, if there are multiple ghost tours which are taking place, and these are just good economic activity, people are making money out of that, and livelihoods are, maybe there is a way to further improve that. Maybe, there needs to be more shops and hotels set up in spaces which are haunted because people love to go and see.
Um,
And, and if that's, we can generate more economic activity, which is welfare for people, we'd be delighted to do that. So there are very many ways in which there is strong economic activity taking place, some good, some not so good. And we want the data set that we produce or the analysis that we produce to have an impact on that front as well. That's one of the ways in which we are thinking of use case. And at this juncture, I think I'll have to leave because I have another meeting. I hope that's okay. But this
yeah,
was
yeah.
so good. Such
Definitely, it was great having you. So, Azania, you've done a lot of research, like you've done a lot of personal research before as well, and I think you have a paper on Mumbai haunted spaces as well. So, can you tell
Yes.
us more on this?
So I actually have been working on like the experiences of like people feeling haunted, paranormality in the Indian
Mm.
context, and for me, particularly in the Mumbai context since 2019, which is now 6 years ago, and that makes me feel incredibly old, right? I was a second year undergrad when I started doing this kind of research work, and it was completely by accident, which is why I often feel like I didn't choose the ghost chose me, and they have since then absolutely refused to let go. There have been many times that I've tried to let go, and I'll go on to that as well. But so I was a second year undergrad. I needed to pick my major for my third year, and my to be like, okay, I'm doing a BA honors. What's going to be my thesis
Mm.
on? And I was a declared literature major, which meant my thesis had to be literary somehow or
Mm.
the other. But due to some complicated reasons, I ended up having a supervisor who was a political scientist. And I was at that point already starting to get a lot more interested in questions of what does the modern city look like and how can we make it better.
Mm.
And I wanted to do a project on slum rehabilitation societies because so my own father grew up in a slum, moved up, and then the chawl that he lived in was torn down and has now become building complexes. So for me, that was always a part of like the backdrop of like my conversations with my paternal family during my years of growing up, of just that transition of what like the change in space feels like, and to then have those, like their earthly homes sort of like go down and then become completely unrecognizable, was of course an interesting sort of like experience for me to observe. And I wanted to do my project on that. And obviously my university was like, you can't do that because that's not literature. And I was like, okay, broadly define literary, what can we do? So I was like, wait, that place has a lot of ghost stories. What if I did a project on, oral stories, ghost stories? That's kind of literature. And they were like, yeah, yeah, liberal arts school. They were like, fine, fine, literature, sort of,
Mm.
sort of. And we're India, where we have a strong oral tradition, and I will
Mm.
completely say that stories communicated through words as opposed to text remain literature. And I was like, great, let me do a comparison on how the ghost stories have changed from when this place was a chawl to now it has become these massive, 16, 17 floor buildings. And it was incredible the way the ghost stories have remained very deeply rooted in the space, but adapted. So, a ghost that used to go to a well and like
Mm.
haunt people there now is in the lift, right? Like, ghost is the same. What it does, catch small kids, same, but location completely modernized.
Mm.
A ghost that used to have walk around and like you could hear ghungroos at night, that would happen in particular block of chawls.
Mm.
Now that was happening on like the first, second, third, and fourth floor of the buildings, but not above. So that location limit again remains the same. Ghost remains the same, but like geography completely
Mm.
modernized. And I was like, wait, this is fascinating. This is really cool. This is telling us something about people. And I kind of like went into it, did that for over a year, spoke to many, many people in these, who'd lived in the chawls and were now living in the buildings. And what became very obvious was both those times, those stories had, and again, I'm not saying that their experiences are not legitimate and they haven't experienced those things, but there was a very strong link between the difficulties they had faced in their day-to-day existence and where those ghosts popped up. So, there would be these ghosts that were in and around the well, and there were water shortages, right? Like, this is
Mm.
like, 50s, 60s, 70s, Mumbai, like, not good economic social standing for these people. They're facing difficulties with waters. They have to go to the little taps and, fill up their matkas and go to their houses. They don't have running water at that point. So, of course, there is this anxiety that, oh, what if the water runs out at night and you need to do this thing? It's a scary experience.
Mm.
A lot of women would feel like, oh, when we go out to use the toilets in the open, in the grounds, we'd feel like someone's seeing us, which again comes from this. I mean, as women, we understand and we relate to this anxiety of being vulnerable in a dark place at night. And now, that anxiety often became that, if you're in an elevator, and even with these building complexes,
Mm.
the electricity often was a little fluctuating. Like, they had 24 hours electricity, but sometimes, just stop and then start again.
Mm.
So for people who hadn't been used to an elevator, the sense of like being in this claustrophobic elevator that just stops was a significant source of, anxiety. And these sort of like the conversation about, the hallways are really long and, you kind of feel like someone's going to knock on the door and run away. And sort of like their complaints with architecture. And I mean, there is significant literature, significant architectural literature on how these slum rehabilitation buildings are not built for human inhabitation. They're basically vertical slums and quite poorly
Mm.
designed, just with the aim of maximizing space, not accounting for people's community, not accounting for people's own needs, not accounting for their lives. So there were like these very legitimate concerns that have been voiced by academics that were being voiced very differently by these people in a way that was being listened to, because they'd say that, oh, we've had 1 billion people come take surveys and nothing happens. So they don't want to talk about those things in those classic survey words. But when you start talking about a ghost and you start talking about the ghost that occupies the lift that doesn't quite work,
Mm.
there is sort of like, we're talking about it now, like, 6 years on. So there is a sort of recall value to that. And I was like, this is incredible. This is amazing. And that sort of became the bedrock of all the kind of like development work and sort of like the residence policies that I have been interested in, that sense of like discomfort that people have and are unable to express. So for me, that was the beginning of India Ghost Project, though it wasn't that. I didn't know what that was going to be, 6 years down
Mm.
the line. I hadn't met Devakar. So, now it's taken on very different shapes. And it was very qualitative. It was purely interviews, purely talking to people. There was not necessarily an economic element to it as well. So, but yeah, that was the beginning of this very long and fascinating journey with the ghosts.
But so at that time, you actually went to these offline places and you met people and you
Yeah,
went to
yeah,
those
yeah.
places also.
Yeah, this is 2019, so this is before the pandemic. I did
Yeah.
complete that dissertation while lockdown in Mumbai, but the beginning of it, the field work of it, which was about nearly 6 to 8 months, because I started quite early on, that was in person.
But so, how was it? Like, you are talking about ghosts and going to those places. So, how did you feel? I know that your aim was very research oriented, but you are still putting yourself in that physical proximity.
Sure. Sure. I think, again, one of the important things to understand here is that, when we think of haunted spaces, we often think of it in the very Bollywood kind of way of like Havelis and like there is a jungle and there is a jhad which has like ulti latki chudail on it. Like there is this sort of aesthetic image that comes into your head. But as far as your urban spaces are concerned, the haunted spaces are also spaces that have like about 150 200 people living in them, right? Because
Mm.
as a deeply populated country, we don't really have the luxury of saying like this building is now being abandoned. And again, for a lot of these people, there was no element of choice. They had been frankly kicked out of what their houses had been for generations and were now put up in these buildings. And I mean, if they were living in those sort of housing conditions, it wasn't like they could afford to leave. So it wasn't like I was going in the middle of the night to like a very deserted place with like, no one for miles. I was going to super crowded,
Mm.
spaces in like Malad West, where there were like, children were playing downstairs, aunties were taking little walks, there was like a sabzi wala outside. I was fine because there was no sense. And I mean, of course, I was going in the middle of the day. So
Mm.
there was that. I think there were the more sort of obvious anxieties for me were that I needed to be able to speak to these people without looking like I was coming in from a place of a judgment and
Yeah.
a place of like sort of superiority,
Yeah.
right? Because I maybe like, my part of my family did come from this background, but I did do not. And so being more aware of that was a bigger concern on my mind than, oh my God, I'm gonna
Mm.
get haunted. I mean, also for me personally, I mean, of course, like I'm not like going to go to a cemetery at 5 a.m. for the kicks of it, like,
Mm.
what sense of self-preservation. But I also feel like, I mean, I don't think that anything in life, whether it's, human or non-human, bothers you until and unless you go and bother it.
Mm.
And so for me at that point, of course, there was a sense of anxiety. I would not want to get stuck in a lift there, but then again, I wouldn't even want to get stuck in like a lift in my own building. I didn't really feel an active sense
Mm.
of, oh my God, something bad is going to happen, something is going to follow me home. It just was, I was having conversations with people in a building and I was more struggling with the social anxiety of it, never having done field work before. And I feel like that for me has remained. I have never necessarily felt that anxiety going into a space that, oh my God, something bad might happen, something
Mm.
may follow me home. I also do, I mean, I am religious, so I will like, say a few prayers, but again, that's just more of like a mental sort of like
Mm.
gymnastics. And as Diwakar was saying, we're very lucky to have researchers on our team who are like quite either similarly aligned, who are like let their curiosity sort of like give them the sort of like fortitude needed to do this, or they're quite atheist agnostic in their belief towards this, so it's just not something they're worried about. And I think that sort of like allows us to do the kind of work we want to do.
So, you've also spoken to these people who, as you said, during COVID times, there were people who were actually helping out the people who saw the ghosts and stuff. So, what is that group of people? Is it like tantrics or is it like a mix or what?
So I'm sure there are tantrics doing this, and
Hmm.
I'm sure there are babas and dargahs doing this. But like the people I was speaking to actually is a very lovely group of people who I'm still quite good friends with. Called they're called pairs. I think it's the Parapsychology Institute Research India. I'm not sure what the full form is, and I'm sorry guys if you're listening. But like if they're like lovely people. A couple that leaves it is Sarabjit and Pooja. They do a number of podcasts as well, and of course their interest in the paranormal is coming from a place of purely, we believe this is real, we're going to help people like negotiate with it, navigate it and experience it. But they also come from a place of, this is not something you need to fear, because it is something we can navigate. And there was another sort of paranormal helpline that was set up in Delhi. I spoke to the gentleman. I am forgetting on his name. I don't know if the helpline is still active. And again, these are people who are believers in the paranormal, but they come in from a place of, most often when you have something that someone says is paranormal, it's not real, it's likely something in their head, or which again doesn't take away from the legitimacy of that experience, but
Hmm.
or something that is like physically going on with your
Hmm.
house. And just a sort of very simple example of this is like, we in my own house for the longest used to hear someone like dragging something across the floor on the house above us, right? And now your first instinct is something creepy is happening, something is going wrong. And again, given the fact that, we come in from this, like I come in from the space of having heard this a billion times, that listen, if you think something's paranormal, check everything else first, because in 99% of the cases, it's like very,
Mm.
very unlikely that it is. It turned out that the people above us had a habit of using their washing machine late at night.
Mm.
So then the washing machine would do the chick 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 chick
Yeah.
sound, and then that would, like, go above my bed and go like chick chick chick. So at one point at like 12:30 a.m., me and my mom went up and I'm like, can you switch off your washing machine? And that stopped, right? So you're like, okay, these things. And I think that was also what happened in COVID, that a lot of people were living in houses they weren't used to spending 24 hours in. Because I mean, imagine, like, before
Mm.
COVID, there was no such thing as things being offline, right? Like if we were having this conversation before COVID, there would never be a question of doing this from home. It would be at a studio. It would be me coming over to where you are, maybe us
Mm.
meeting in the middle. We've just become incredibly comfortable now with this thing that, oh, we work from home, we spend more time at home. But before COVID, like, I mean, I remember I was out of the house at like, 9:30, 10, go to college, don't come back from college till like 11 because you're doing, a lot of like
Mm.
rubbish with your friends, you're going around. Home was where you slept. And
Mm.
maybe on Sundays you were at home with your family. And I think that was the experience for a lot of people. So when they had to stay home from work, stay home from university, stay home from school, there was just this sort of like eerie quietness which made them hear things like, you don't know what your aircon sounds like when it's like being
Mm.
sounded outside without the traffic, right? We just don't know what our houses sound like empty, and that scared people. And again, because it was so empty, you heard like things magnified. You could hear what was happening next door, you could hear what was happening upstairs, and we were all terrified during COVID.
Mm.
Like, forget the paranormal, we were just genuinely really scared. And we were also seeing death at a scale we hadn't seen at that
Mm.
before, right? I mean, if you remember the whole period during like January, February, March 2021, I
Mm.
mean, our newspapers, our social media was flooded with images of death.
Yeah, yeah.
You're seeing like, open pyres, you're seeing like graveyards running out of space, and that is something that as humans will scare us. So I
Mm.
feel like at that point, there was just this genuine environment of anxiety that was like very fertile home for all these stories. And I think what the teams of, these parapsychology, paranormal researchers did at that point of time was incredibly helpful. I mean,
Mm.
as we were saying that there is, the good that comes out of the paranormal and the not so good that comes out of the paranormal. These people, most of them were doing it for no money,
Mm. Okay.
and they were doing it as a social service in the way that, what, talk to us on call, explain to us what's happening. And it, in some ways, it also kind of like alleviated that social isolation, because you felt like you could talk to somebody about the
Mm.
stress you were feeling without the judgment, right? Because sometimes if you tell somebody, listen, I think my house is haunted, they're going to be like, are you okay? What's, there's this sense of like, what will people think of me, which completely was taken away. And I feel like at that point this became a social good, um for just kind of like talking things through. And again, for most of them, it was just kind of like being told like, listen, it's fine, it's the pipe, or it's this, or it's
Mm.
like some kind of gas leak, like it's all very fixable and in control, became a sort of way to close the loop around those ghost stories. I think that's also incredibly important to do, because sometimes we fester in anxieties and fears which
Mm.
aren't quite grounded in something.
And especially when it's like old people, they just giving them an assurance, it goes a long way.
Yes,
Whatever reason, the
absolutely.
youngers of their family might not be doing it. So then it just helps to
Hmm.
have these channels.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can relate actually when you're saying this changing face of, because my uh, father, when he was younger, he used to stay in Bombay only with three of his siblings and his parents, and they have a whole bunch of ghost stories in that house. And
Hmm.
I grew up listening to them, and we just took it as it is. But just a while back, I had been thinking as to why would you continue living there? Like today, you cannot think of it. You know that. I cannot think of saying something like there's a ghost over in my house or in that place or anything. Probably also because we just have so many more options in general. But
Yeah, absolutely.
mm,
But I think that cohabitation still exists. That cohabitation with a parent, alleged paranormal, still deeply exists in, like, our
mm,
societies. I mean, and not just in like, slums or like social
mm,
economic. I mean, there are like, these fancy like apartment complexes, gated communities, including some literature that's coming from other countries like, Singapore and Thailand, where people are like, cool, something's going on, but such life. You often kind of like, this is the thing, you often kind of just live with what is,
Mm.
especially if it's not something that is, detrimental to your everyday. I think that
Yeah.
becomes sort of the distinction between, the fun ghost stories,
Yeah.
which, it's good for us to discuss. You're like, oh, this happened to someone, that happened to someone. And then the ones that kind of veer on the line of people are getting abused, which is
Mm.
where, something is happening, something is so deeply out of control, like, and I mean, this happens in case of people having mental health crises,
Mm.
whether it's like someone who's having, for example, a schizophrenic episode, and then the family doesn't quite want to accept that this is a medical
Mm.
reality, and then, they're being dragged pillar to post from, like, religious institution to religious
Mm.
institution. And that then becomes a cause of like very significant sort of culturally allowed suffering. And that is kind of where we want to draw the line, that, okay, this is where, with the fun, whatever people are saying these stories, like, its existence, it's like
Mm.
having some impact, but it's not like on people's human rights. That's where, we like no value judgment. But where it comes to like these kind of narratives, where when it's a question of people's human rights, where it's like abuse of
Mm.
women, abuse of children, abuse of the elderly, in
Mm.
fact, abuse of just men, you're like, okay, wait, this is something that, is perhaps a space where, we can provide the data for the people who are in positions of
Mm.
power to be able to do something about it.
Yeah, yeah. I'm sure, especially actually not just rural areas, there'll definitely be pockets where there is a much, much darker dynamics.
Yeah. So for our team, and again, it's a group of some incredible young people, all researchers who have like, of a lot of them actually are working on a volunteer basis, because, we're currently crowdsourcing, we're crowdfunding for like, next bit of the research, while we get some grants in place to keep it up and running, because, these projects are expensive, and currently Diwakar and I are bootstrapping it. We're putting in our
Mm.
own money into this project because that's how much we believe in it, and we know it's going to be
Mm.
going somewhere. But we've got an amazing team of people supporting us, and how the day-to-day functioning of this looks like is, especially now when we're creating the survey tools, there's a lot of reading involved. We're trying to see how we define the paranormal, what is within the scope of our project, and what is beyond the scope of our project. And that also is quite hard to determine, because there are some things that, some people may say is paranormal, say for example tarot cards,
Mm.
whereas for us maybe that's not necessarily part of what we want to do with India Ghost Project. And of course, ghost is just a word we use because it's catchy, but we, mean every kind of like paranormal entity out there. We mean your jinns, we mean your chunels, we mean your, whatever is the weird thing on the people
Mm.
tree, right? Like everything is included in this category of our data set. So we're doing a lot of reading around it. We're also trying to find out from people on the internet what are their stories. We're having them email them to us, to sort of see where are the hotspots, where are like some of the recurring patterns, where are some of the places where, we're getting 5, 6, 10 stories from, and maybe those are
Mm.
the places we go to first. And then, we have our weekly meetings. We talk through these things. We talk about, what are our potential leads, where we might be going. And once our ethics clearance is through, we're hopeful to like start out in Mumbai, in Calcutta, in Hyderabad, and hopefully in Bangalore,
Mm.
because these are currently where our team members are
Mm.
based, and then of course expand further to the rest of the country. And then that will involve going to these spaces, asking people questions about, the ghosts themselves, the ghost stories, and like multiple people being asked the same questions, asking them questions around the societal and demographic informations around the space, like who are the people living in the space,
Mm.
what are their experiences, what kind of communities do they come from, what kind of professions do they fall into, like is there a pattern there, is there a gendered sort of situation going around, and what kind of story, like, men say some kind of stories more than women say, and kind of like collecting that particular data, seeing where people fall on like belief on this. Like, sometimes, I may just tell you a story, oh, this is what I heard. I may not believe in it, versus me being like, oh my God, this happened to me. Or like, this happened to my friend and I know for a fact it's true. So kind of the veracity of those claims. So we have like multiple kinds of data points captured within the data set. And of course, with like ghost tours or like sort of places where money is exchanging hands, we want to capture the economic data. We want to know how much money people are spending on these activities, what portion of their, monthly salary is going into something like this. Is this something
Mm.
that's a regular expense for them? Because,
Mm.
for some families, across communities, it's a regular expense to kind of have someone come in and like do some kind of cleanse in their house.
Mm.
And what kind of socioeconomic background are these families coming from? Are these families that, can afford to do it? Or is this like portion of money that, is going away from something else that is going into this? Or like, and what is the kind of money that people are spending on like, recreational paranormality, which is like, I've decided this Sunday I'm going on a ghost tour with my friends, or I'm
Mm.
going for a weekend at like a haunted house in Goa. And hopefully, the goal is once we have all these data sets, we can try and start to answer some of these questions, try to paint a better picture of what, you know, India's experience with paranormality looks like. How is it changing? What does it look like in this century, in this like turn of
Mm.
phase, when we're developing really rapidly, but we're also holding on to fairly traditional beliefs. And what does that intersection look like?
What is the ethical clearance you're talking about?
So, because again, we're very, very strongly an academic project that,
Mm.
while of course our resources are for everyone to use, we want our work to be published within, peer-reviewed journals. We want to be able to do articles around it. We need the questions that we ask people to go through an ethics clearance with an institution so that the professors involved in the committee can say, okay, this is fine. You can ask people this. You're not collecting any data that is going to be dangerous. It's going to be harmful. You're
Mm.
not like violating any human rights. Your team is appropriately sorry, your team is appropriately trained to ask these kind of questions, because a lot of this is like also sometimes sensitive, right?
Yeah.
And you don't want to send 15-year-old. I mean, we are not sending 15-year-olds who has no training whatsoever on
Mm.
the field and is like asking somebody like something that might be like just like jar them or traumatize them.
Mm.
So in a way that protects the interests of our researchers and protects, far more importantly, the interests of the people we are speaking to. So as an academic project, that is something that we take very seriously. I mean, both Diwakar and I are like academics with like very, very sort of strong roots in academia. And I think it's quite important for us for this not to just become, a random collection of data. We need it to be data that can be used, that can be verified, that can be, applied across context,
Mm.
that, it should be data that's, say a student sitting in like Delhi University can use. It should be data someone sitting at Harvard can use as well. And therefore it needs to meet ethical clearances for both those sort of standards. So we want to have it at like quality of good good academic data.
Great. Yeah. So I think this is the differentiating factor for sure, your academic background and your meticulousness
Hmm.
towards maintaining the standards. Because a ghost project, it could have been anything, it could be any kind of a crowdsourcing kind of a platform. But especially because I saw your profile, yours and Divakar's, I was like, these guys are from London School of Economics and all this stuff, and she's written a paper and what is all this. That is very
Yeah.
fascinating. So yeah,
No,
I'm very happy.
absolutely.
It was great having you all and knowing more, and this was a very interesting conversation where we understood many different facets of paranormal.
It's been lovely speaking to you as well, Priyanka, and for, you and also others who might be interested in keeping up with our work. We have our website. It's called indiaghostproject.com, and you can go there. You can sign up to our newsletter. We promise we won't spam you. You will get maybe an email a month telling you what we're up to, what our new findings are, our data set, and like whenever it is live, and it shall be live soon, it will be up on our website. We also have an Instagram account, which is again at India Ghost Project. You can keep up with us there. We're also quite active on LinkedIn, so you can follow us on India Ghost Project on LinkedIn as well. And also, especially important since this is coming out on Friday, 13th of June, we are currently launching our Kickstarter campaign to crowdsource and crowdfund projects. This money is not going to go to me and Diwakar. This money is going to go purely into paying for the researchers who are going to be on ground collecting this data. And we want to pay them fairly. We want to ensure that our project is supporting people who are like doing these like, and as you said, often brave things, going into these spaces, collecting this very interesting data for us. So that is what the money is going to support. The money is going to support keeping our website live and free for everybody. So your funds, if you can spare, and that can be anything from 100 rupees to 1,000 rupees, if you can like put it into our Kickstarter, we would really, really appreciate that.